iconography of goddess worship, the concept of female sanctity, and the art and symbols associated with it. Fache ran a meaty hand across his hair.
And Saunier was knowledgeable about this?
Nobody more so.
I see.
Langdon sensed Fache did not see at all. Jacques Saunier was considered the premier goddess iconographer on Earth. Not only did Saunier have a personal passion for relics relating to fertility, goddess cults, Wicca, and the sacred feminine, but during his 20-year tenure as curator, Saunier had helped the Louvre amass the largest collection of goddess art on Earth. Labrys axes from the priestess's oldest Greek shrine in Delphi, gold caduceus wands, hundreds of jet ankhs resembling small standing angels, sistrum rattles used in ancient Egypt to dispel evil spirits, and an astonishing array of statues depicting Horus being nursed by the goddess Isis.
Perhaps Jacques Saunier knew of your manuscript?
Fache offered.
And he called the meeting to offer his help on your book.
Langdon shook his head. Actually, nobody yet knows about my manuscript. It's still in draft form, and I haven't shown it to anyone except my editor. Fache fell silent. Langdon did not add the reason he hadn't yet shown the manuscript to anyone else. The 300-page draft, tentatively titled Symbols of the Lost Sacred Feminine, proposed some very unconventional interpretations of established religious iconography, and would certainly be controversial. Now, as Langdon approached the stationary escalators, he paused, realizing Fache was no longer beside him. Turning, Langdon saw Fache standing several yards back at a service elevator.
"We'll take the elevator,"
Fache said, as the lift doors opened.
"As I'm sure you're aware, the gallery is quite a walk."
Although Langdon knew the elevator would expedite the long two-story climb to the Denon wing, he remained motionless.
"Is something wrong?"
Fache was holding the door, looking impatient. Langdon exhaled, turning a longing glance back up the open-air escalator. "Nothing's wrong at all," he lied to himself, trudging back toward the elevator. As a boy, Langdon had fallen down an abandoned well shaft and almost died treading water in the narrow space for hours before being rescued. Since then, he'd suffered a haunting phobia of enclosed spaces, elevators, subways, squash courts. The elevator is a perfectly safe machine, Langdon continually told himself, never believing it. It's a tiny metal box hanging in an enclosed shaft. Holding his breath, he stepped into the lift, feeling the familiar tingle of adrenaline as the doors slid shut. 2 floors, 10 seconds.
"You and Mr. Saunier,"
Fache said as the lift began to move.
"You never spoke at all? Never corresponded? Never sent each other anything in the mail?"
Another odd question. Langdon shook his head. "No, never." Fache cocked his head as if making a mental note of that fact. Saying nothing, he stared dead ahead at the chrome doors. As they ascended, Langdon tried to focus on anything other than the 4 walls around him. In the reflection of the shiny elevator door, Langdon's eyes fell to the captain's tie clip, a silver crucifix with 13 embedded pieces of black onyx. Langdon found it vaguely surprising. The symbol was known as Crux Gemata, a cross bearing 13 gems, a Christian ideogram for Christ and his 12 apostles. Somehow Langdon had not expected the captain of the French police to broadcast his religion so openly. Then again, this was France. Christianity was not a religion here so much as a birthright.
"It's a Crux Gemata,"
Fache said suddenly. Startled, Langdon glanced up to find Fache's eyes on him in the reflection. The elevator jolted to a stop and the doors opened. Langdon stepped quickly out into the hallway, eager for the wide-open space afforded by the famous high ceilings of the Louvre galleries. The world into which he stepped, however, was nothing like he expected. Surprised, Langdon stopped short. Fache glanced over.
"I gather, Mr. Langdon, you have never seen the Louvre after hours?"
I guess not, Langdon thought, trying to get his bearings. Usually impeccably illuminated, the Louvre galleries were startlingly dark tonight. Instead of the customary flat white light flowing down from above, a muted red glow seemed to emanate upward from the baseboards, intermittent patches of infrared spilling out onto the tile floors. As Langdon gazed down the murky corridor, he realized he should have anticipated this scene. Virtually all major galleries employed infrared service lighting at night, strategically placed, low-level, non-invasive lights that enabled staff members to navigate hallways and yet kept the paintings in relative darkness to slow the fading effects of overexposure to light. Tonight, the museum possessed an almost oppressive quality. Long shadows encroached everywhere, and the usually soaring vaulted ceilings appeared as a low, black void.
This way,
Fash said, turning sharply right and setting out through a series of interconnected galleries. Langdon followed, his vision slowly adjusting to the dark. All around, large format oils began to materialize like photos developing before him in an enormous darkroom, their eyes following as he moved through the rooms. He could taste the familiar tang of museum air, an arid, deionized essence that carried a faint hint of carbon, the product of industrial coal-filtered dehumidifiers that ran around the clock to counteract the corrosive carbon dioxide exhaled by visitors. Mounted high on the walls, the visible security cameras sent a clear message to visitors. "We see you. Do not touch anything." "Any of them real?" Langdon asked, motioning to the cameras. Fash shook his head.
Of course not.
Langdon was not surprised. Video surveillance in museums this size was cost-prohibitive and ineffective. With acres of galleries to watch over, the Louvre would require several hundred technicians simply to monitor the feeds. Most large museums now used containment security. Forget keeping thieves out, keep them in. Containment was activated after hours, and if an intruder removed a piece of artwork, compartmentalized exits would seal around that gallery, and the thief would find himself behind bars even before the police arrived. The sound of voices echoed down the marble corridor up ahead. The noise seemed to be coming from a large, recessed alcove that lay ahead on the right. A bright light spilled out into the hallway.
Office of the curator,
the captain said. As he and Fash drew nearer the alcove, Langdon peered down a short hallway into Saunier's luxurious study. Warm wood, old master paintings, and an enormous antique desk on which stood a 2-foot-tall model of a medieval knight in full armor. A handful of police agents bustled about the room, talking on phones and taking notes. One of them was seated at Saunier's desk, typing into a laptop. Apparently the curator's private office had become DCPJ's makeshift command post for the evening.
Messieurs,
Fash called out, and the men turned.
Ne nous dérangez pas sous aucun prétexte, entendu?
Everyone inside the office nodded their understanding. Langdon had hung enough ne pas déranger signs on hotel room doors to catch the gist of the captain's orders. Fash and Langdon were not to be disturbed under any circumstances. Leaving the small congregation of agents behind, Fash led Langdon farther down the darkened hallway. 30 yards ahead loomed the gateway to the Louvre's most famous section, Le Grande Galerie, a seemingly endless corridor that housed the Louvre's most valuable Italian masterpieces. Langdon had already discerned that this was where Saunier's body lay. The Grand Gallery's famous parquet floor had been unmistakable in the Polaroid. As they approached, Langdon saw the entrance was blocked by an enormous steel grate that looked like something used by medieval castles to keep out marauding armies.
Containment security,
Fash said as they neared the grate. Even in the darkness, the barricade looked like it could have restrained a tank. Arriving outside, Langdon peered through the bars into the dimly lit caverns of the Grand Gallery.
After you, Mr. Langdon,
Fash said. Langdon turned. After me where? Fash motioned toward the floor at the base of the grate. Langdon looked down. In the darkness, he hadn't noticed. The barricade was raised about 2 feet, providing an awkward clearance underneath.